Fox Carolina investigates how is South Carolina punishing sex offenders targeting children. Our investigative team looked at 3 years worth of court records and data showing an alarming trend. Many offenders aren't spending any time in prison.
If you're watching that thinking, how is that even possible? Today, we're going to walk you through the exact reasons that can happen in the legal system.
Fox Carolina Investigates uncovers hundreds of child predators avoiding prison time.
It's horrific to think that somebody would not get punished for that or just have to spend a day in jail.
I know when you hear stories like this, when you hear stories about any children being exploited, we automatically think about the abuser being sentenced to long prison terms. And that's the way I feel. I feel if you're involved in any kind of violence against children or women, any kind of exploitation of women and children or the elderly, in my opinion, you should spend decades in prison. However, these sentencing outcomes depend on a few different factors. Number one, what charges can be proven? Number two is, what crime is someone ultimately convicted of? And number three, how does the state law define the offense? Because that can vary from state to state.
We comb through the records in every county in South Carolina, analyzing the sentences of 417 offenders who were convicted between January 2022 and January 2025. Of these, 240, more than half, spent no time in a state prison. Many of them were given credit for their time served in jail. For 30 of those offenders, that time was just 1 day.
When people hear 1 day in jail, there's an assumption that somehow the system let this person walk. But that's actually not what happens. A lot of times these charges are actually reduced because of a plea agreement. Even if the case involves a serious allegation against a minor, the prosecution, they might feel that with the evidence they have, they can't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And we don't want the offender to be able to walk away without responsibility. So that's why they may enter into this plea agreement, because with the plea agreement, you're holding the offender accountable and he's being charged with a criminal offense. It might be a lesser offense, but he's still being charged with a criminal offense. And that's normally what happens with these plea agreements.
Put him away. Yeah, what if it was your kid?
They're doing a very poor job, honestly. That's ridiculous.
In a previous interview with an investigator on these types of cases, he told us everyone needs to take these offenders more seriously.
A lot of people will just look at it as pictures. It's illegal to have, like drugs, and drugs are legal, so therefore it's just a possession crime. But I look at it as we're not just protecting the children that are in the images, but future children as well.
We know as law enforcement how dangerous these folks are. And it's not just a jaded opinion. I think when you see some of the stuff they do, it makes you worried about some of the stuff they're capable of. Okay, so to see somebody get a charge like that 1 day or 30 days for a charge against a child, to me, it's just, it doesn't match. It doesn't add up. However, we do have a legal system where even perpetrators like this are entitled to due process. Another thing that people don't realize is there are significant evidentiary challenges to these cases. Things like delayed disclosure by the victim, which happens sometimes when the actual abuse happened at an earlier time. And when you think of these crimes against children, just know that there's no statute of limitations when it comes to this stuff. However, it does get more difficult as time passes to really investigate some of these cases because evidence is so important. And over time, you may lose evidence. You may lose your contact with witnesses. Also, inconsistency with statements happen sometimes when, say, somebody might have given a statement earlier, years prior, and then years later they give another statement and the statements don't match. That can create a challenge. And none of these challenges are the fault of our victims. You got to think that some victims, when they're going through this stuff, they don't want to remember all of these things. These aren't happy times, things that they want to remember every single detail. So this is the reason sometimes that prosecutors push for a plea deal. Because of all of those factors, if you just feel like your case isn't going to be strong enough to take to a trial, or you feel there may be some areas that leave holes for a defense attorney to come in and really take your case down, that's why the plea bargains happen, because the prosecutors want to make sure that these folks are being held accountable for what they've done, even though they may have committed a crime that was a little more serious. And that's the part that I don't like about the plea deals, is because even though you got a conviction on somebody like that, they're still, in my eyes, they're sex offenders.
We even found cases where the offenders didn't have to register as a sex offender.
Wow. That's ridiculous.
Wow. Yeah, no,
What do you think?
that's shocking. That's terrifying.
And then they're not going to stop.
So this is another part that confuses people. That sex offender registry depends upon the suspect's final conviction. What was he finally convicted of? Because he may, like I said earlier, he may have been charged with a sex crime, but now when he gets his final conviction, he's convicted of an assault, or he's convicted of some kind of endangerment or delinquency to a minor or something like that. So in cases like that, as frustrating as it is, they may not be obligated by the courts or by state law, by the statute, to register as a sex offender. Also, one thing I want you to remember, if somebody is convicted of a crime against a child and they're required to register as a sex offender, that doesn't mean that they'll always have to register as a sex offender. We've all heard they have different tiers. They have a level 1, level 2, and level 3. Your level 1 is like a lower end offender, maybe somebody who had no criminal record, committed an act but never made contact with the victim. It might have been something on the internet. So with a case like that, that might get pled down to just something at such a low level that they don't have to register to be a level 1. And also, there may be a time period on their probation that is different from level 2. So a level 2 is a little more serious. They may have to register, but their registration with a level 2 might have a time limit. It might be 10 years, it might be 15 years after that period. If they do not reoffend and they don't get arrested, they may be able to leave the registry. But just know with a level 3, that's not going to happen. Level 3 sex offenders are the ones that are more than likely to reoffend. So because of that, they'll remain on that registry for life.
The Attorney General's office prosecutes the majority of these cases, so we asked him, one-on-one, what's behind these sentences.
What's your response to those to look at some of the punishment that these online pros have received and saying, why so little?
First off, the people out there that are criticizing me and the men and women working in the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force is absolute garbage. I will defend the work of my office and the work of the men and women who have dedicated their lives to investigating online child predators and to prosecuting them and putting them away.
You can see the frustration on his face, right? Because I got to tell you, ICAC, that particular task force, we have one in my state. They're very, very active in all over the country. Just know that those units are filled with folks that are dedicated to fighting child exploitation. Their role is to put great cases together, to find evidence, to seek out individuals who are engaging in this kind of behavior, any kind of exploitation of children. That's their role. And once they find these individuals, they'll build cases against them. And they try to, as law enforcement, you try to build the best case possible with the most evidence, with really good statements from our witnesses. You get your case and you present it to the courts, and at that point we're done. You know, we present our cases. We try to do the best job we can in documenting the evidence that's in the case and presenting a case that can go forward if it has to go to a trial. So law enforcement, we really don't determine the sentence that somebody gets. That is determined through case law, by the statutes that's charged if you have the elements to meet those statutes. And then in the end, it could depend on a jury. If they do go to a trial or something like that and they get convicted by a jury makes the decision. But it all depends on where you live, because in each state, sometimes the laws are different. So just know jurisdiction is going to play a huge part in how cases are handled, because in some states, I know, we all know in Texas and in Florida, they're not putting up with this stuff. If you do stuff like this, you're going to jail, right? So it all depends on where you are, the jurisdiction, and it depends on the laws in that jurisdiction. And another thing to consider, what I try to do with some of these cases is I like to take some of my cases like this, I like to go to a federal level with these cases, because I find with the federal government, you have more like mandatory minimums. Because a lot of these possession cases, sometimes state to state, it will depend on the number of images. If you only have 1 or 2 photos, you may not be charged with possession of child pornography. With the federal government, they have different type of laws, and they have a lot of mandatory minimums. So if you commit a crime, plea or not, you're doing a minimum amount of years in jail.
Price was arrested and prosecuted at the federal level, and he's now serving a 20-year sentence. If he had been sentenced to the max on just one of the state charges he faced, he would still be in a state prison today.
So for somebody like me who does this every day, my job is to protect women, children, and the elderly from exploitation. Seeing stuff like this, it bothers me. And it is frustrating being an investigator when you have cases like this. However, we all have to keep in mind that, we do have a legal system. Sometimes we don't always agree with the outcome of certain cases, but just know that for law enforcement, we're just going to keep trying to put great cases together. So remember, in these cases, there are two things that determine the outcome. The first is what can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And the second is, what was the person finally convicted of at the end of the case? One thing I can tell you for certain is that traffickers and pimps do not want awareness like this reaching you. Together, we can bring these issues to light, and we'll make it harder for exploitation to stay hidden. So if you'd like to help us to reach more people, please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. But more importantly, please share this video with at least one person that you think it could help. To continue learning, click on the video on the screen, or you could click the link in the description below. And remember to stay safe, stay aware, and always stay 10-8.